Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Pakistan says the EU Watchdog report has exposed India's misinformation campaign against Pakistan. Speaking in Islamabad, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the UN should investigate how it was misused against Pakistan. Meanwhile, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, Moeed Yusuf, said the network to malign Pakistan was spread in 116 countries. In India, farmer unions say they will block railway tracks and roads across the country again if their demands are not met. Protests against the Modi government's controversial new agricultural laws have entered the 16th day. The UN General Assembly has approved a resolution commending progress in peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. The motion also urged stepping up efforts to tackle attacks by the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and their affiliates. Russia voted against the resolution while China, Pakistan, and Belarus abstained. Brazil has reported 770 more deaths from COVID-19, with the toll approaching 180,000. Meanwhile, the virus has claimed more than 142,000 lives in India and infected 9.7 million people. Pakistan recorded 50 new deaths and just over 3,000 new cases overnight, while its death tally exceeded 8,600. Globally, there have been more than 1.58 million deaths and over 69.5 million infections. And in golf, American Amy Olson has grabbed the first-round lead at the U.S. Women's Open in Houston. Olson shot a 4-under par 67 at the Cypress Creek course of Champions Golf Club. A hole-in-one helped Olson gain an advantage over Japan's Hinako Shibuno, Thailand's Moria Jutanugarn, and South Korea's A-Lim Kim. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pakistan says the EU Watchdog report has exposed India's misinformation campaign against Pakistan. Speaking in Islamabad, the Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the UN and the EU should investigate how they were misused against Pakistan. More in the following report.
Qureshi said the UN should make sure that government-owned and sponsored organizations piloting disinformation, fake news and hate are not able to gain any space in its platforms. He said authorities in Switzerland and Belgium should investigate the finances and transparency of the NGOs registered within their jurisdiction. Qureshi said the European Union should also take notice of their institutions being misused blatantly in this massive campaign against Pakistan. He urged the EU parliamentarians defrauded by New Delhi into endorsing its false narrative to recognize India for what it is. Meanwhile, Special Assistant to PM Moeed Yusuf said the network to malign Islamabad was spread in 116 countries. He said Indian state-backed actors should be tried in the International Criminal Court for forging fake documents in the name of international organizations.
And the Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi held a media briefing at the Foreign Ministry alongside the National Security Advisor Moeed Yusuf, discussing the EU Disinfo Lab report that has just been released. And for more on this, we are being joined by Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, retired defense analyst. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Now, Pakistan has been alerting the world of India's propagandist activities. With Islamabad's stance being vindicated, how massive is this revelation?
See, it's a very big development, very big revelation. But at the same time, I think it will not be given much attention if Pakistan fails to utilize the opportunity provided by this situation. We know that India has been aligning Pakistan for terrorism, particularly. They have been funding, but then they have been diverting the attention of their own people and also of the international community. We should now find out specific such incidents which were projected by the Indians through their propaganda, but this was false propaganda. Pakistan was not involved in those things. Those things must be now discussed in the media and also through the think tanks abroad in various countries, so that the truth is now brought out to the people, not only to the international community, but also to the Indian people, so that they should come to know what all has been going on and to what extent the governments have been telling lies, fabricated stories have been fed to them. Similarly, in our own country, see, our own people have been the target of this propaganda. The Indian propaganda machinery made sure that our own people, they start criticizing our own intelligence agencies. I mean, there are people in our country who believe to the extent that Pakistan is really sponsoring terrorism in India, and they have been criticizing on our television channels. So, first of all, I think it is very important that our own people start believing the narrative which is fed out to them by our own government and also by our institutions. Similarly, there have been disappearances, the people have been disappearing, and Indians have been propagating that the intelligence agencies of this country have been taking them away. This was also wrong. This has been proved. Then the corruption allegations by the Indian propaganda media against Pakistan Army officers, this has also been found out that this was not true. All these things should then be, I mean, all the lies must be opened up. These must be presented to the international community and also to our own people and also to the Indian population. So there has to be, I mean, after all, this has been going on for a very long period, for 15 years. So it will not be an exercise of a day or two. So there has to be a sort of people sitting down, finding out all these things, carrying out a sort of research, and then working out a plan to counter all what has all been going on till this day against Pakistan. So that must be countered. India's lies must be exposed completely to the Indian people and also to the Pakistani people.
Sir, will this report change the way international organizations, including the UN and the EU, view India and its propaganda campaigns?
For that, I think we'll have to not only approach UN, etc., but then we'll have to engage some of the well-known think tanks abroad. And I think they'll be able to help us out, and they'll be able to, I mean, we must fund them. We must tell them that this is what it is, and this will make a good study for them. So if they can come up with all sorts of real stories and exposing the lies, then I think the international community will believe, definitely their credibility perhaps will be better than any unknown think tank. So I think that is something we have to, line up and we try to proceed that way.
Thank you, sir, for your time. That was Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, retired defense analyst. And we were just discussing the EU Disinfo Lab report, which has just been released. And today, the Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and the National Security Advisor Moeed Yusuf conducted a media briefing discussing this issue. And the Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has appealed to international organizations and partners and news organizations to investigate and take action against the Indian disinformation campaign, as several international laws have been broken. Now we are going to be joined by Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, retired defense analyst. Sir, thank you for joining us. Sir, how can international organizations prevent such malicious agenda-driven campaigns from influencing their policy decisions? Sir, can you hear me? We are being joined by Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, retired. Unfortunately, we are facing some technical difficulties and we'll be getting in touch with Mr. Lodi. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. I can hear you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, retired defense analyst. Sir, how can international organizations prevent such malicious agenda-driven campaigns from influencing their policy decisions?
I think the first thing is the way it has been done, that we know that this thing has been brought out and now everything is clear, and especially because I'm happy that it is not from our side, because if Pakistan would have made this revelation, probably the world wouldn't have given much credence as is their past behavior. But now that it has come from a very potent organization and very credible organization, this is one way of stopping such crime. And look at the enormity of this crime and the intensity, that at what level they were operating, how many outlets they were operating, and they were even aligning, taking advantage of some very respectable platforms like ANI or even UNO NGOs and some European Union members and all that. So they really made a mockery of a lot of people. And I think this is the reason that it will attract reaction. So your question basically is how we can stop all this and what we can do about it. The first thing is that the way it has been revealed, the way it has been unearthed, we should have more organizations at international level, at regional level, even at national level with us, so that such things can be unearthed and then exposed to the world. And secondly, we must, I think, take this thing to the UN, and we must ask them to formulate certain rules and laws, international rules, according to which such things can be punished. So we'll have to, I think, work on a number of directions. We must take full advantage of this revelation, and we must not allow any respite as far as the Indians are concerned.
Sir, just to build on this a bit more, how can Pakistan counter India's propaganda and fake news, which serves to malign Islamabad?
I think this is an important question, and especially it is important from the point of view of our own people getting affected. I mean, you must have seen that there are certain trends which are so horrific from the contents are concerned, but and they are so they undermine our institutions, they undermine our state as a whole, and still we see a lot of popularity and a lot of spread, they acquire. So the first thing is that we must create certain platforms, credible platforms within Pakistan, where the people can refer to really find out about the authenticity of a news, whether it is likely to be fake or what is the level of authenticity. It can be from, let us say, 10 to 90 or 100, whatever. They can assign certain numbers so that it becomes easy for especially our young people, university students and college students, to really find out that what is the actual fact in this whirlwind of falsehood. We must be able to find out or at least get closer to the truth. And I agree with you that we must create certain special but credible platforms where everybody has some trust in them, and we can refer to them to find out, if we like a litmus test, whether anything which is going around is true or false.
Right, sir. Thank you so much for your time. And now moving on, as nations observe World Human Rights Day, Pakistan questioned the global inaction over Indian atrocities in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The Foreign Office held a panel discussion in Islamabad to draw attention to the miseries faced by the Kashmiri women. More in the following report.
Indian-occupied Kashmir, one of the most militarized places on earth, has been the scene of worst violence over the past 73 years. Besides other atrocities, Indian troops are using rape as a weapon of war in the occupied valley. Addressing the ceremony, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan will never leave Kashmiris at the mercy of Indian troops.
We've been tortured. Yes, we've been maimed. Yes, we are going through a difficult time. Yes, there are over 900,000 soldiers, occupiers, occupying our land.
Kashmiri rights activist Mashal Hussain Malik also shared her experience of how she and her little daughter faced humiliation at the hands of Indian authorities.
I have been body searched, I have been beaten up, I've been attacked. Even my daughter has been, who was only 2 years old, when we would go to the central jail in Srinagar to meet my husband. They would scan her pampers, they would, body search her everywhere as if she's, hiding some explosion inside her. It was so humiliating for me as a parent also.
A short documentary on incidents of gang rape by Indian forces left many among audiences in tears. Lawmaker Malika Bukhari also highlighted the plight of half-widows in Kashmir. Participants urged the international community to help ensure rights of the Kashmiri women who remain a key victim of India's state violence. Sumaira Khan, Indus News, Islamabad.
And moving on to India, farmers' unions say they will block railway tracks and roads across the country if their demands are not met. Protests against the centre's controversial new agricultural laws have entered the 16th day. Farmer leader Bhuta Singh said the date for paralyzing the country's rail and road traffic will be announced soon. Meanwhile, a farmer group has moved the Supreme Court against the reforms. It argues that the laws make farmers vulnerable to corporate greed and exploitation. There are now 6 petitions pending hearing in the top court. The UN General Assembly has approved a resolution commending progress in peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. The motion also urged stepping up efforts to tackle attacks by the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS and their affiliates. 130 of the 193 member countries voted in favor. Russia voted against the resolution. China and Pakistan were among the 59 countries that abstained from voting. Commenting on the development, German Ambassador Christoph Heusgen said Russia has let down the Afghan people. And at the United Nations, Pakistan has reiterated support for a stable and sovereign Afghanistan at peace with its neighbors. Pakistan's envoy to the UN, Munir Akram, assured Pakistan's continuous support to the intra-Afghan talks. He said Prime Minister Imran Khan has maintained that the conflict can only be settled through a broad-based political solution. This comes after Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi met Afghan envoy Najibullah Ali Khail and welcomed progress in Doha talks. And in Pakistan, 50 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, pushing the toll to 8,653. The health ministry says over 3,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said there are more than 44,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of more than 432,000 countrywide cases, over 379,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said some 191,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported nearly 126,000 cases. In the capital city of Islamabad, over 34,000 people have been infected so far. And now Brazil has reported 770 more deaths from COVID-19, with the toll approaching 180,000. Meanwhile, the virus has claimed more than 142,000 lives in India and infected 9.7 million people. Globally, there have been more than 1.58 million deaths and over 69.5 million infections. More in the following report.
As countries inch closer to acquiring a COVID-19 vaccine, the apparent pre-dawn era has made it the toughest run in the pandemic's history. Across the U.S., healthcare systems are bursting at the seams with more than 107,000 coronavirus patients in hospitals. They are arranging vaccine prep kits and deep freezers as regulatory authorities endorse the Pfizer vaccine. Meanwhile, internal disagreements over procuring the vaccine from China have stoked differences in Brazil. Argentina has signed a deal with Russia to procure 10 million doses of the Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccine.
We have signed the contract with the Sovereign Fund of the Russian Federation that guarantees us the provision of Russian vaccines for Argentina. The contract says that we will be able to have enough doses to vaccinate 10 million Argentinians between January and February.
The UK says every secondary school student in London will be tested for COVID-19, while Spain says at least 1 out of every 1,000 residents has died of the virus. Meanwhile, Paris has announced a delay in the reopening of cultural venues and a nighttime curfew.
Mardi prochain.
Next Tuesday on December 15th, as we had announced, we will start a new phase in easing the lockdown. But the rules will be stricter than we previously thought. First decision, the venues which welcome the public, which we had planned to reopen on December 15th, will remain closed for an extra 3 weeks. The conditions for the reopening are unfortunately not there.
Australia has halted the production of its homemade vaccine after trials showed the jabs can interfere with HIV diagnosis, while South Korea's ultra-cold warehouses are preparing to store Pfizer's vaccine, as Seoul is set to buy 20 million vaccine doses.
And in France, climate activists rolled out a vast mocked-up poster of President Emmanuel Macron in front of the Eiffel Tower. They pressed for more action on climate change 5 years on from the Paris Accord. More in this report.
The head of Greenpeace France said they were here to show that Macron isn't a great defender of the climate despite pretenses. She said France was not exemplary in fighting climate change, being far behind other European nations. But Paris says it is committed to reducing carbon emissions and has a strong record of environmental initiatives. The agreement signed in Paris in 2015 was hailed as a potential turning point in efforts to contain global warming. But the United States left the deal, and campaigners say other states have failed to push hard enough for climate change.
Moving on, several political groups in Palestine have condemned Morocco's plans to normalize ties with Israel. In a statement, Hamas spokesperson Hazem Qasim called the move a political sin which harms the Palestinian cause. And he said Morocco's actions encourage the Israeli forces to continue violating the rights of Palestinians. He said normalization deals will increase Israeli aggression and its settlement activities on Palestinian lands. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that Israel and Morocco have agreed to forge diplomatic relations. Morocco became the fourth nation to normalize ties with Israel in return for U.S. recognition of Rabat's sovereignty over Western Sahara. And the U.S. President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris were jointly named Time Magazine's Person of the Year. They were chosen from a list of finalists that also included the man Biden vanquished at the polls, President Donald Trump. In a profile of the pair, Time said that Biden and his running mate offered restoration and renewal in a single ticket. It said the election of Harris broke gender and racial barriers. Time wrote that America bought what they were selling as the country saw the highest voter turnout in a century. Two other finalists, both group candidates, were the healthcare workers battling the pandemic and participants in the racial justice movement sparked by the killing of George Floyd. Now in China, the stakes have never been higher as pigeon racing enthusiasts are spending big to indulge their passion. More in this report.
On a bitterly cold morning in northern China in November, over 8,000 racing pigeons were released into the sky. The birds set off from Hebei province, with most of them heading for Shanghai, some 1,000 kilometers south. These racing pigeons, especially bred and trained for long-distance races, are in some cases worth huge sums of money.
If the pigeon is not successfully raised, then it will be worth nothing. But if we successfully raise a good racing pigeon, then it's going to be very expensive. It'll be worth a lot of money.
One racing enthusiast, Yu Yuguang, entered the Hebei race with his 7-month-old little ancestor. The bird was declared the winner when he made it to Shanghai in a record time of 16 hours, 24 minutes and 54 seconds.
This pigeon has broken the record in the national competition. It's a national competition. It is unprecedented for a young pigeon to fly back in just one day.
A Chinese collector recently made headlines when he paid $1.9 million for a racing pigeon called New Kim at an auction in Belgium.
And now on to business news. European stocks are trading lower as investors monitor the COVID-19 vaccine rollout and the rapidly approaching deadline for Brexit talks. The pan-European stock 600 slipped close to 1% as majority sectors declined. Frankfurt's DAX, the CAC 40 in Paris, and Italy's FTSE MIB have slid almost 1%. London's FTSE declined over 0.5%. Earlier, Asian stocks traded mixed with Hong Kong, South Korean shares edging up, while Chinese, Japanese, and Australian bourses shed. And let's move on to sports. In golf, American Amy Olsen has grabbed the first-round lead in the U.S. Women's Open in Houston. Olsen shot a 4-under par 67 at the Cypress Creek course of Champions Golf Club. A hole-in-one helped Olsen gain an advantage over Japan's Hinako Shibuno, Thailand's Moria Jutanugarn, and South Korea's A-Lim Kim. Olsen, who began on the back nine at Cypress Creek, aced the 16th hole with a 139-yard shot. The ball bounced a couple of times and rolled into the cup. 7 other players are tied for 5th place at 2 under par. Only 23 of the 156 players in the field finished under par in the first round. In football, Belgium have been crowned FIFA's Team of the Year for a 3rd straight time after retaining the top spot. They won 6 games this year and booked their place in next year's UEFA Nations League finals. The top 4 remain unchanged, with France finishing 2nd, Brazil at 3rd, and England staying 4th. Portugal moved up to 5th, while Spain and Argentina improved 2 places to finish 6th and 7th, respectively. Hungary were the most improved side in the rankings, having gained 44 points and 12 places to break into the top 50. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.